You brought up the Department of Education, and you know that the schools are one of my big
Yeah.
issues. And one of the most base tweets you sent, I think it was right after taking over the account, was being extremely clear that school choice is maybe fine as like a stepping stone, but what we really want is to abolish. That was a little controversial, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe it was a little controversial, but like as you say, I mean, our platform speaks to it's a radical platform, and we won't rest until we have the absolute separation of education and state. I know that's a big deal for you. That's a big deal for a lot of libertarians. I think that's where society completely goes wrong, is that education is really at the root of everything. If we don't have a well-educated populace and the merits of liberty, how can we expect them to ever be anti-war, anti-Fed, anti-drug war, etc.? We can't until that's fixed. So yeah, we wanted to make clear that school vouchers and things like the expansion of charter schools might be a good stopgap, but really the biggest conflict of interest in the world is having the state have a monopoly on education. We wouldn't accept this if it was Walmart doing the same. This is one point Tom Woods brings up all the time. Kids in school aren't forced to, look at 9 pictures of the former Walmart CEOs, say a pledge to them, be taught about all of their, personal political doctrines, things like that. But that's what school is just for the state. So it's a big deal. I'm glad you made that a big focus of your campaign. It's a hugely important issue, especially with all the wokeism and CRT creeping into the mainstream.
No, definitely. And that's what I'm just going to keep on hammering on, because I think it's also the issue, quite frankly, that's most important to voters. I think that there still seem to be Republicans who believe that the public education system can be fixed if only they're put in charge of it. But I really have misgivings because I've seen people like, and I'll pick on Chris Rufo, and I do this because I really respect Christopher Rufo, and I know that I think that he knows that. But one of the things I've really had a problem with that he's talked about lately is he wants to replace the curriculum that's going on in schools now with a more conservative leaning curriculum. And I'm like, no, dude. No. That is not the point of what we're talking about. This is not just like the person who's in charge gets to make the rules. That's entirely antithetical to the whole thing. We have a disagreement there, but I think that ultimately, like, there's no way that the public, I'm an organizational psychologist. I know how to assess systems and how to fix systems when they're broken, and it's not a fixable thing. And I think for me, like, trying to advance messaging around really helping people to understand that it is not a fixable system because it is a staffing problem. We don't have the teachers to be able to put into schools to be able to get all the non-woke teachers out because of how the teacher education program works. And there are many other problems too, but that's probably one of the most fundamental ones for me is like, you get all the woke teachers out of school, who do you replace them with? And what happens then? And it just doesn't work. But I also think there's a balance. And I think one of the things that I struggle with some libertarians in helping them to understand is that you can't just the public schools are going to die when the public wants the public schools to die. And I feel like what I've heard in response to my campaign has been people speaking up saying, well, why don't you just argue for a bill to decouple like education and government? I'm like, because the public isn't going to support that right now because they don't understand why we need to decouple education from government. What are some of your, I don't know if you have thoughts about that at all. That was me rambling.
Yeah,
Really.
here's my I'll try to make this concise. I think all of
Yeah.
those, subjects are really important, and you have a much better background in education to speak to this than myself. But what I will say is I stumble at some of the views that voucher systems are innately good, and here's why. Some of them have been very good. I know Corey DeAngelis does great work with this. He said that Arizona's most recent one is one of the best, but what I've seen from some voucher programs that I've looked into is they don't succeed really in doing anything more than co-opting private schools and turning them into kind of quasi-government schools. And when I say that, I mean that right now you ostensibly have some private schools that aren't really subject to much government regulation. But what some of the voucher programs have done is force those schools, if they want to accept children that have the vouchers, to kind of adopt additional regulations that they otherwise wouldn't have had. So that's a big problem too. I wish that short of, ending the public school system, which I think is important and I'll always speak to, is favoring kind of like a tax credit system instead, because that seems ultimately way more libertarian to me than vouchers where, voucher accepting private schools would have to be subject to more restrictions. Does that make
Mhm.
sense, or do you have any thoughts on that too?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that makes total sense. I think how I view school choice is I view it as kind of a necessary stepping stone to do a couple things. Because I think, I think we're kind of tackling the issue from like two different angles, and I
Mm.
think that that's important to do because we need to attack it from as many angles as we can. I think where I tend to think about in terms of creating social change and creating your basic like change management process of getting your normal person who's busy, who has a job, who maybe doesn't, spend all their days reading the 12 economics books I was assigned to when I joined the Libertarian Party that I still haven't read yet, by the way. Like you have to get them comfortable with an idea, right? And I think that the way I view it is a school choice gets people comfortable with the idea of shopping around, of looking at other options, of not just taking what's given to them, and instead it says, okay, well, between these two schools, how do I really evaluate which one is better, and making the decision sometimes like, oh, well, I can opt out of this school and go over here. That's really great. And I think that once we get people to kind of make that base decision, that kind of opens them up to saying, well, if I can do that, why can't I do this instead? Or what other possibilities are there that I didn't even consider? Because I just always thought I was just going to put my kid in public school and I didn't even question the system at all. And I think that that's what the value that school choice gives us is it gets people thinking about schools in a new way. What do you think
Totally. And
about
I
that?
think that might be the one silver lining of the COVID regime is shutting down all these schools have forced parents to think about this much more than they ever otherwise would have. And I
Mhm.
think some even got more angry when schools didn't open up. So, I mean, there are some positive things on our side to get people thinking about it. And I agree. I think generally politics is a downstream of where the culture is at and winning the ideological kind of battles. So,
Definitely, definitely. Well, I won't bore everyone with the school choice stuff anymore, or the Department of Education stuff. Though I could probably go on about this all day. But I'm really glad that you guys are tackling the issue on the Twitter account and making sure that the known and unapologetic libertarian position is we want to decouple schools from the government, and that's what it is, and we are not going to stop until the Department of Education is gone, and then we can figure out a plan for what we're gonna do. Um, I,
absolutely.